welcome. My name is Gemma Benton, and I am your host for Remembered, a show dedicated to missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, their families, communities, and nations, and for all of us. I thought it would be helpful as we were getting started for me to share a little bit about myself and why I'm doing Remembered in this particular way. So first of all, I will tell you that I am Menominee and Filipino. I'm mixed. I am a traditional native singer. I am very much involved in language and culture. My husband is Western Shoshone. I didn't grow up. I grew up as an Air Force brat, so I didn't grow up with my traditions. I reclaimed them as part of my recovery process of becoming clean and sober, which has been 30 plus years now. And as part of, reparenting myself, of healing myself, healing that cycle of shame and abuse and trauma in my family. So I started that journey. I won't go too much into all of that, except for to say that I was, by the time I was 15, I was already practicing, deeply practicing addict, alcoholic. I realized I had to change. I didn't know what that change looked like and that it would require everything. It did, and I'm grateful for it. So, having said that, I will say that I'm very much involved in tradition as a means of, traditional healing and recovering from those places of intergenerational and historical trauma in our communities, in our Native communities, and in these places where we blend and mix our lives together. What I want to share with you is what Remembered is not. Remembered is not an investigative journalist reporting channel. I'm not an investigative journalist. I've been an addictions counselor. I've been involved with the wellness, white bison and Wellbriety communities. I am very much rooted in healing our communities. So I didn't want to do an investigative journaling process, although I love listening to those stories and those shows. It is also, Remembered is not a true crime show, although I love those and I love watching the drama around it, and I love the process of discovering, what happened and hearing all about the stories. What I will tell you is that I have a background in personal narrative. So I am the coordinator for the Healing Story Alliance, which uses storytelling or stories, personal narrative, and traditional stories, cultural stories, as a means of healing. So that I'm grounded in that experience of the way that we share stories and the way that it brings about healing. So that I wanted to bring more of that into this channel. I wanted to create awareness through this channel, getting word out and being support and a resource to the families and the communities around this great loss. I also wanted to do work around these places of where we need collective grief rituals, where we need places where we can come in and be present to our losses, because we are experiencing loss at a grand level, both privately and personally in our lives, as well as for all of humanity, as we witness more and more crime, as we witness more tragedy. It's very difficult for us to process this. So we need places where we can process it, and that I see is a very important piece that we're lacking right now in our society. So this is a way, Remembered is a way for us to do that, to come together and to grieve for the loss of these women's presence in our lives. So Remembered also is about all women. It's about honoring those that are missing and those that have been murdered, especially. but it is about honoring all women as sacred. I also wanted this channel to be about moving through trauma and addressing trauma, intergenerational trauma, historical trauma, and again, these places where our lives and our stories blend and intertwine, because I think this is key to what's happening in our world, and it's certainly key to any kind of solutions that we're going to find. And I believe that it is us finding the solutions. So I don't believe that we can find those solutions outside of these stories. I don't believe that we can find these solutions. We can rely on government or law enforcement or anyone else to find those solutions for us. I believe it's us that matters here, and that the conversations, the solutions need to happen between us so that we can find answers. We can bring these women home, and we can find solutions for the larger picture of what's happening in our communities. So I want to tell you a little bit about my story as a woman recovering from both experienced trauma since I was a young girl, and addiction and alcoholism, as well as being part of community and watching the way that we respond to trauma or interact in our lives with people in general. So what I will do is share with you a story. When I was a teenager, my mother worked in retail. She worked at the mall, and my mother is very intuitive. We have very much, all of us are very intuitive. And I had seen before where she had small flashes, she'd have flashes of insight, but this one particular time, she had the day off, she wasn't working at the mall that day, and we were, going through some things in her room, and she had this flash. It hit her, and if you've ever had that experience, it hits you like a wave, and suddenly you have these pictures and these feelings and this emotion, and without knowing why. So she had a premonition or a precognition or a clairvoyant experience. And what she saw was a woman being raped at the mall. And she started crying, and she was trying to, she grabbed her Bible and was reading out the Bible, trying to banish this image in her mind and this experience that she was having. And witnessing it, I kept asking her what's happening, and she would give me pieces of it, but she really was so much in fear that she didn't know how to react other than try to banish it away. It left an impact on me, and I felt a responsibility. In fact, I told her during that time that we need to do something, but we didn't know what to do. And certainly, no one would believe a woman of color. But I believe that impacted me for a reason, and I believe so. Specifically, out of that situation, her words of "I don't want to see it" really imprinted itself on me. And so there was a time when I refused to see as well. And I had to learn to acknowledge what I was seeing. And I had to learn, as I began to do ceremony, I would get these flashes. And I had to really understand the difference between what we call like a vis, which, people, there's so much hype and Hollywood around it. And what we call intuition. We're all intuitive. It's it's not an unusual thing, and it's something that there's so much shame and weirdness around that we've kind of pushed out. And so to me, it's important as part of this process. It's one of those gifts that we have that comes out of recovery, is being able to honor our intuition. And every woman's story that I know that has been through trauma of some kind, abuse of some kind, and not just women, men too. That intuition has been an important part in their story. Every story that I've heard about the missing and murdered Indigenous women, there's almost always some clue about that she had a premonition, that she had a bad feeling, that somebody had told her, I got a bad feeling about this. And I believe we need to listen to those stories. We need to listen to each other. We need to listen to those stories inside of ourselves and really pay attention to our intuition. And this is one place, along with our stories, that we can talk about those things in a safe and a clear way, in a really grounded way that's not Hollywood or hype, but in a meaningful way that has relevance to very important issues. Here on Remembered, I want to honor all that we are. All of the pain, all of the grief, all of the sadness, in a way that doesn't bring us down, but brings us more present. And I believe it's really honoring all of this, all of the loss that we've had, all of the grief, all of the trauma, all the shame, as well as all the joy, all the beauty that we have, all the wisdom that we have, collectively together in one space, holding that for ourselves and each other. I feel like it's really important in this time to do that, so that we can become more present to these stories, and we can become more present to the solutions. So, and working a lot in our communities, one of the things that I've seen over and over again is that because we have no place to process these stories, we become reactive, we become triggered in situations where it's very difficult. And certainly issues around missing and murdered Indigenous women are very difficult, if not horrifically impossible. We need places in our community where we can, without having to filter, unpack our stories, where we can share our stories freely without shame or guilt, where we can be honored and seen and heard. And in that process, we become more present. In that process, we become more available to each other, and we become more available to solutions because we're not reactive. Again, this is all based in our traditional practices, but if you want to hear about science, there's the Polyvagal Theory, and I forgot Stephen, I will list his name below, but he talks about in his research around Polyvagal Theory, about having these places of support in our communities where we are becoming more present with one another. So that is also another why behind the way that I'm doing Remembered. So in Remembered, we're going to do several things. First, we're going to have short 2-minute offerings where we get to be present to 3 women's stories, or not their entire stories, but glimpses into their stories. We get to sit with them for 20-30 seconds apiece and just look at them, just see them and feel them through the screen, honoring their presence and honoring our loss for their presence in our lives. So whether they are missing or whether they're gone from us, we want to honor them with our presence, with seeing them and witnessing. Let's define what remembered means. So there's some confusion. Some people think remembered, one of our slogans or our chants around the missing and murdered Indigenous is always remembered, never forget. And I use that in our background because I want us to really bring in awareness of what that means. So someone shared that the two mean the same thing, and they really don't. So to be remembered is actually a deep presencing process. It's like missing someone, but it's more than that. Someone doesn't have to be missed or gone from our lives to be remembered. We can become more aware of who they are in our lives and what they mean to us, and the impact they make just being alive. So if we hold that women are sacred, this is part of healing that story, of really understanding what it means to see one another and hear one another. So when we remember these women, we're really seeing them. We're really bringing our awareness to who they are and what they bring to our lives, just being them. And then we get to feel that open space of where we don't feel their presence, that loss that we feel, and honoring that, not shying away from it, not moving away from it, not brushing it off or minimizing it, but really becoming more present to it, seeing them and feeling their loss. It's important, and it's important in how we develop emotionally. It's important in how we move through our trauma collectively. Remembered also is about our responsibility to care for that spirit, or care for the person that carries that spirit, and our responsibility to a spiritual reality. It's becoming present to that. So for those women that we've lost, and those families that are experiencing grief because of their pain, we have a responsibility collectively to be with them, to be present with them and to them. Part of the anger comes when we don't get that. We get angry because we feel ignored, we feel invisible, we feel not heard. And simply becoming present to each other, remembered, bringing our awareness to that situation is key to our moving through this, so that we can move not past the anger in a sense of brushing it off, but so that we can get to what's important. Being remembered is like when we miss someone, but it's not just missing them in our lives, although it is. It's more than that. It is seeing them and hearing them in a way that oftentimes in an intimate way, and oftentimes in a way that we're uncomfortable doing because of trauma. Like, we have a difficult time really expressing love in our communities because of the trauma, because it means that we might lose you. And so in this particular place, it's important for us to say, we miss you. We miss you. We see you. We see the way that you've touched our lives, the way that you've made a difference just in you being present and you being here. Being remembered is seeing one another at our soul level, at a very deep level. It's beyond, the makeup or the not makeup. It's beyond the look good or not look good. It's beyond the anger. It's beyond the frustrations we have with each other and our communities. It's really becoming present to our own story with each other. So seeing, as I see you, seeing my story reflected as well. Seeing those places where we are together on this journey. Being remembered also implies responsibility. It implies that you and I are connected, and I have a responsibility. I have a responsibility to care for you, to express love and respect to you, especially because you are sacred, but always. It it implies that in remembering, because you are sacred, that there are certain things that I must do. There's certain things that I'm accountable to, that I must be willing to do. I must be willing to be present to your pain. I must be willing to take action on that in some way, that I must do something. It means that I have a responsibility to care for you, to nurture your spirit in some way. And in our Native communities, we have different ways that we do that. You know, in all Indigenous cultures, we have different ways that we do that. As we've become more contemporary, we've lost some of those ways. But, you know, we often put, you know, food out, water out. We, you know, offer a prayer for those that we've lost. We sing a song. We, you know, put flowers in places of honoring, whether they are alive or they've passed. So remember, it is an opportunity for us to do that through video, through technology, to take 2 minutes to remember someone, you know, to remember 3 women, and then you know, bring ourselves more into their stories and reflect on what we're seeing and witnessing through their stories. So Remembered will also feature interviews with families, authorities on subjects related to missing and murdered Indigenous women and their families and communities, as well as intergenerational trauma, violence, and healing and recovery, and how we do that, how we create more collective grief rituals, how do we, you know, work through some of these issues together as a community. Then finally, I will offer a third type of video, which is a deeper remembering, where we focus on one woman and we go deeper into her story, and we bring healing ritual into those places, you and I together. So I invite you to subscribe, and to there'll be more videos coming soon. Also, I am looking for songs that are dedicated to this journey that we are all on together, to honoring missing and murdered Indigenous women and peoples and our families and communities, and these places of loss and grieving for one another, for the loss of the people that we love in our lives. So I'm looking for singers who want to share their music. I love traditional music, obviously, and I want to get that out. Always behind, you know, when I share, I'm trying to share music that is available to all of you to use in whatever way, in ceremonies and rituals and on marches and in our communities. And also, I'm looking for families who want to share their stories. So if you know of families, please share. If you have a story, please contact me. You can reach me at email at gbenton789@gmail, and I will put that in the link as well. So blessings to you. Thank you for taking this time to watch this video. Thank you for subscribing and sharing so that we can get this message out. We can do this healing. We can remember these women together.